Okay, guys, I guess we'll start. People can trickle in. My name is Bill Mallon. I'm the editor of the journal Shoulder and Elbow Surgery. This guy sitting next to me, I've just appointed as moderator, is Jed Kuhn. Jed is the associate editor of JSES.
Okay, your time is up.
Okay. I have a somewhat of an important question on a personal nature. Does anyone have an HP Scepter laptop computer? Good. I lost my power cord to my computer, which is now dead as a doornail, and I have to fly to London tomorrow with no computer powers. I'll find something today. Okay. They asked me to speak about reviewing for JSES or other medical journals, and it's hard to, I wanted to revise this a little based on some stuff Jed sent me, but since my laptop no longer works, that was not really an option. But it's hard to be definitive about how you review and what you can do or say, because each paper is different. I mentioned yesterday our JSES reviewer all-star team. Within the last year, a lot of the members of JSES or ASES are tired of hearing me complain about I can't get reviewers, because it's probably the hardest part of our job is to get reviewers for papers. And we really appreciate a great deal when you guys review, and many of you in the audience I see today do review for us. This is kind of our all-star team. We rated all of ASES last year on their reviewing ratings. We rate everybody. It's all in a computerized database, so we know what you're doing. So when people say, like, hey, I review all the time, believe me, we know. And these are the guys that pretty much always say yes, and a few women in there too, of course, and almost always say yes, almost always do the reviews on time, and almost always do good reviews. So we're very, very appreciative of these people. We're appreciative of everybody, but this is our all-star team, so to speak. So how do you be a good reviewer? Some of you won't remember this guy, but if you're an old fart like me, you will. There's an actor and comedian named George Burns who was somewhat famous because he lived to be over 100 and kept going, and was actually acting well into his 80s. And I remember one time he was actually asked on the Tonight Show, how do you be a good actor? He says, it's easy. If the script says open the door and walk in the room, if you open the door and walk in the room, you're a good actor. If you don't, you're not. And that sounds very simplistic, but he's pretty accurate about that. Many of you will know a guy named John Fagan. John was attending at Duke when I was the chief resident, and really one of my mentors. And he gave me some advice as a chief resident that I've never forgotten, and almost any success I've had in ASES is largely a result of what John told me. He said, just find one society that interests you and fits what you want to do. Focus on that society. He says, don't try to be a member of ASES, AOSSM, ANA, AOA, and try to do something in each society. He says, you can't do that. He says, find the one society that most interests you, and for me, that was ASES. And then he said, when they want you to do something, say yes. And that was very important, and that's what I've sort of done all along, and why I've been able to keep moving up the line. When I was in practice, I had the same medical assistant for 25 years, just a woman I called the fabulous Kim Tuck. And when Kim would ask me to see a patient, my answer was OKISE, O-K-I-S-E, which meant, okay, I'll see him. I didn't argue and say, like, well, no, I'm too busy, I got this, I can't do it. I said, my practice was almost all shoulder, elbow, and a little bit of hand. But I didn't care if it was a diabetic foot or a spine. My practice was big enough that I would just say, yeah, okay, OKISE, I'll see him. And if it's a diabetic foot, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I can take care of that initially and, sort of triage it to the next guy. It gets the patient in the door. The patients are not pissed off because they couldn't get seen that day by somebody. And it's a lot easier to say OKISE and see the patient than it is to sit there and argue with, their front desk and the medical assistants and everyone else and say, well, I can't do it because I got this, I can't do it because I got this. And, so it was something I always did in my practice. And I know you say, well, it's real busy. All we would tell them was, look, he'll see you. You may wait a little bit because he's pretty full, but he'll see you. And, it made the patients happy. It made the medical assistants love me because they always knew they could dump them on me if nobody else would see him. But it works. So to me, the most important thing to be a good reviewer, going through all of that, is when I ask you to review the papers, the most important answer is yes, I'll do the review. And like George Burns being a good actor, that makes you a good reviewer in my mind. Now, I'd like everyone in the room who's not busy, doesn't think they have a busy practice and a busy life, to stand up now. Okay? The excuses that I get are typically, I'm too busy, I'm way too busy right now. So if you notice, nobody in the room just stood up. Everybody's busy. So basically, if you say you're not busy, you're sort of dumping it on the next guy. The other thing I get is, well, this is not in my area of expertise. The one that killed me was the hardest things, the two hardest places I get, and April Armstrong is out there. I see April's one of our associate editors also. Pediatric elbow papers. When I get a pediatric elbow paper, I just want to tear my hair out because I know I'm going to be like months trying to find reviewers for this. And there was a female that I found who actually is the chief of upper extremity surgery at an academic center, and I met her and she told me she was a pediatric elbow reviewer, so I sent her this paper, and it was on radial head dislocation. Her answer to me was, I can't review that. I do pediatric elbow, but I don't do congenital pediatric elbow. And it's like, I just wanted to So, you're going to say it's not in your area of expertise. You guys are in American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons. If you notice, there's about 600 members. That's like the elite of the elite. I mean, we expect you should know something about most things in shoulder and elbow surgery and should be able to review these things. So I want you to say, okay, I'll review it, and that'll make you do a good job. Teddy Roosevelt had a great comment. He said, whenever you're asked if you can do a job, just tell them, certainly, I can do it. And, one of my favorite movies, and I'm just rambling up here now, but one of my favorite movies was a Clint Eastwood movie from the 80s called Firefox, in which he's sort of a burned-out Vietnam fighter pilot that they hire to go over to Russia and steal a MiG jet. And, they're getting ready, they're getting the whole thing set up, and finally the guy who's arranging it, the spy, looks at him and says, by the way, Gant, because he played a character named Mitchell Gant, he says, can you fly that thing? And, in his best Clint Eastwood, which I can't do at all, he goes, yeah, I can fly it. I'm the best there is. And that's really what, you guys are the best there is in the world of shoulder and elbow surgery. If you can't review it, who the hell am I going to ask? So just remember that. And I may ramble on a little bit more about some other things about the best there is later. But so this is an example of what we get. This is from the ESCS, which is the database that we use online that Jed is familiar with, April's familiar with. And this is a paper that came to us back in July. And if you'll notice there, we have to get 2 reviewers for it. We asked 13 people. People say, like, why is it taking you so long to get me an answer on this paper? Why is it taking so long to get a review done? Tony Romeo agreed to do it. Tony Romeo is the president of this society as of tomorrow. You don't think he's busy? I mean, Tony has tons of responsibilities, and yet he accepted to review it, and he did the review. He actually was the only person that did the review on this paper. I never was able to get a second reviewer, and I just finally had to apologize to the authors, and I ended up rejecting it. It was a crappy paper anyway, but, So, what my job is to find 2 reviewers for every paper, and I promise you I will not overburden you. When we look at the database of reviewers, it tells me how many papers you've reviewed, how many papers you've accepted, how many papers you've declined. It also told me when you last reviewed a paper. So when I'm looking for a reviewer, I'll look at it and I'll see, Dean Ziegler, and I'll look at the thing, and I just saw Dean out there, so I can count on him. I can, cut him up. And it'll tell me, well, Dean just reviewed a paper for me 2 weeks ago, and I go, well, I can't ask him again in 2 weeks. I can't go to the well that often on someone. So I don't do that. I know when you've reviewed papers, and I won't ask you too much. I know when you've got a lot of responsibilities. I know most of the people. Jerry Williams was president of AAOS, and he's a big shoulder and elbow guy. I didn't ask Jerry to review a paper for the whole year, obviously, as president of AAOS. I know when people become department chairs, Buddy Savoie at Tulane, Gus Mazoka at Connecticut. I know that's a lot more responsibility. They still review for me, but I don't ask them nearly as much. I know the guys that are team doctors for the pro teams or college teams. I know September, October, November are tough. And I also sort of know what your areas of expertise are. I don't try to get you out of your comfort zone, but I do have to ask sometimes just to get reviews. You know, my main job is to publish this journal monthly and to get the reviews done and make decisions. So I'll ask you to review these things, but I will be fair about, asking it. I know there's busy times for everyone. In my experience, the busiest months seem to be January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and December. The other months of the year don't seem to be so busy. So I will ask you to review during those 12 months. But also, if you let me know if you're having problems, health problems, Carolyn Hetrich, I don't see Carolyn's out there, but Carolyn was pregnant and had some difficulties during her pregnancy. Fortunately, she's fine, the baby's fine, but she let me know that, and I'm like, oh, obviously I'm not gonna, come down on you then. So let's just go over now, after I've begged you to review papers for me, how we do this. I get each paper, I assign it to an associate editor like April Armstrong, Peter McDonald, J.T. Tokish in the U.S., Jed Kuhn gets some. There's also a deputy international editor who is Pierre Monsat of France, and he selects an international reviewer. And we do it that way. The reviewers I select on each paper are usually the North American reviewers, US or Canada. Pierre sort of selects the rest of the world, and we do it to try to decrease bias. Now, we don't always quite do it 100% like that. Like on some papers that are very American-oriented or very European-oriented, we may go with 2 American reviewers or 2 European reviewers for those. The reviewers are asked to read the paper, make comments, suggestions about it, and make a preliminary decision and rating. The associate editor, April, Jed, JT, Peter, and we have a bunch of your international ones, make a decision and send it to me as a preliminary decision. And I actually make the final decision and send it off to the authors. I rarely change the decision of the associate editors. I do occasionally, and there's a couple reasons for that. And they're more sort of things that I know that they don't know. I know, for instance, when my backlog of papers is getting so long that I'm like, we got to be more strict on this. I can't accept too many or the queue's going to get so long. I also know, which is really the thing we're at right now, we're actually a little light on papers right now. So if there's a paper on the border, based on its ratings and the reviewer's discussion, I may say, I kind of need some papers right now, so I'll accept that. And those are the times I do overrule the associate editors. We ask you to only make 3 decisions: reject, revise, and accept. You'll see on the website, there's 2 things that says, do not use minor revisions and do not use major revisions. What do not use means is, do not use that, okay? Because everyone keeps using it, and I can't get it out of the system until there's nobody who's making that decision. But people keep making that decision. I can't figure out any other way to say it except don't use the damn decisions like that, okay? So the decisions you can make are accept, which is pretty rare. We accept maybe 1 to 2 papers a year outright. We get about 1,250 submissions a year now. Reject is the most common decision we make because our acceptance rate is between 25 to 30%. We ask you to revise it if the paper is good, but you can see ways it can be improved and note problems that can be fixed to fix it. This should really be a paper that you think is in the top 25% of the papers submitted to the journal. I know that's a rough estimate for you to make since you don't see all the papers like I do, but you read the journal, I hope, and you have some idea what's in there. You know what's a trash paper and what's good and things like that. We also ask you to rate the paper, top 10%, top 25%, top 50%, bottom 50%. And that's where you can be a little more subtle about the rating than just revise, accept, and reject, which is why we're not using minor revisions and major revisions. Some of you may know that after I went to medical school, after I went to college and before I went to medical school, I was a professional golfer. I played on the PGA Tour for 5 years. And, I got to know a lot of people in the golf world. And 2 of the people I got to know were Jerry Tardy and Dick Taylor, who were editors of Golf Digest and Golf World. And I am certain I am the only editor of any orthopedic journal that learned how to do it by calling up the editors of Golf World and Golf Digest to ask them for advice, which I did, because I know them well. And the two things that one of the things they said to me, both of them, don't over-edit articles. It makes it your paper. It doesn't make it the author's paper. And it ticks everybody off. It doesn't make the authors happy. It doesn't make me happy. If the article needs that much editing, they said, just reject it. Throw it away and said, give us something else. The other thing I ask is don't be derogatory in your reviews. These people are your friends, your colleagues, and you've all done these papers. You know how much work this is. This is not easy. You know how hard it is and how much work that you've put into it. We need to respect that. So we ask you to be not derogatory and be very gracious in your reviews, even if the paper is terrible. The old editor's joke on this, you get a paper and you say your paper was both well done and original. Unfortunately, the well done parts were not original and the original parts were not well done. So that's an editor's joke, which obviously is not funny. So make your suggestions and your queries and your comments, but if it's so much work that basically the paper needs to be rewritten, we want you to choose to reject. So just what to look for in each parts of it. For the introduction, it really shouldn't be too long. One of the things you can see as an editor that April and Jed see all the time with us, and I see, of course, but is you can tell when the papers are written by the residents or the medical students because it's all new to them. So, they're droning on and on about things that, is basic to us. You need to remember JSES is a subspecialty journal. We don't want to hear, a summary of all the world's literature on the topic in the introduction. Just the author should tell us why to do the study, nothing more, nothing less, or why they did the study, and not drone on and on. Some of that stuff should be for the discussion. Even that shouldn't be too long. The most important part of the paper is the materials and methods, and it's not the results, because this tells you if the study is well designed. Jed knows more about this than I do by far, and it should basically state its basic design at the out. I hate papers that don't tell you what the basic design is. I want the first sentence in the material and methods to say this is a retrospective case control study. I don't want the reviewers to have to try to figure out what the thing is by looking at the materials and methods. One of the other comments that I absolutely hate is that I get a fair amount of, this is a retrospective study of prospectively collected data. All data is prospectively collected. I don't know anyone who decided to do a study by calling up the patients and saying, can you tell me how your shoulder was 3 years ago and what you were like before we started all this? You collected that data right from the start. A prospective study means that you actually set out the study design at the outset and then started prospectively studying the patients to see see how they fell in line with the study design or not. So we really want you to, in the material methods, to tell us, what the paper design was. Is there adequate follow-up in this? We ask for 2 years minimum for JSES, as JBJS does, but we violate that. We're not too strict about it. Actually, I got a query yesterday from a couple of guys in here about a clavicle fracture paper. We don't need 2 years to tell how clavicle fractures are going to do. For arthroplasty, yeah, we do need to know at least 2 years for that. And many times, it's not even mentioned. They don't even tell you what the follow-up is. You have to guess, which basically, to me, if they don't tell you what the follow-up is, that paper's rejected. So in the materials and methods, are the authors comparing apples and oranges? Are they even telling you what the inclusion and exclusion criteria are, so they tell you who they're studying or not? And Jed is pretty big on this, but the most important thing to look at is there's some obvious bias. This is bias that is more than just the disclaimers at the beginning. The most common thing I see as the editor is a thing you may have heard of called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is all around us in the world. You do it, I do it, Fox News does it, CNN does it. These are people who have a preconceived notion of what they think this should be, and then they do a study to prove it, okay? And they're not lying. They're not, cheating or doing anything unethical. But the study is completely designed to prove what they think is the case. And what happens if that study they do then doesn't prove what their confirmation bias feels? They don't send it to us. That goes in the file drawer. So that's a problem. But look for bias, how the study is designed. Is there something subtle in there, like are they using an outcome instrument that they designed and telling you how good that outcome instrument is? In terms of statistics, we do have a statistical editor. She doesn't review every paper. As a reviewer, you can say, I think we should have a statistical editor review this because I have no idea what they're talking about. That's okay. I choose her to edit papers that when I read them, and I'm pretty good at stats. I have a math background, and when I read it and I can't understand the stats, I ask her to review it all the time. But for the basic stuff, like we did t-test with p-values and nothing fancy. Most of those we don't need a statistical reviewer for. So how are the results presented? They ramble on. The results should be fairly short. Just summarize the results. A lot of them should be in tables. A famous paper when I was a Duke resident, this was in general surgery. This guy, who's actually now a very famous orthopedic surgeon, presented this paper on train injuries. People were hit by trains, which, as you can imagine, they didn't do too well. And he went over all these stats, and he's just rambling on and on about the stats. And he goes, 33% of the patients were injured between midnight and 8 a.m. And all of a sudden, Dr. Sabiston, the chairman of general surgery, the old esteemed academic guy, said, wait a minute. He says, you said 33% between midnight and 8 a.m.? And he goes, yes, sir. He goes, wasn't that 33% of the day? And he goes, yes, sir, it is. And he goes, what the hell does that mean? He says, why do we care? So you don't need to put on just stats and stats and stats just to prove things. And do the results contain all the information that you need to be able to tell, what the results of this study really are? If not, can they improve the paper by adding more details about the results? If you have to suggest that, look, you need to go back and add 74 more patients and redo the study for 2 more years, or as Mohit said yesterday, we want you to add 25,000 patients to this study, that needs to be rejected. If you have to tell them to redo the study, change it completely, that's not something they can just revise as a paper. That needs to be a completely new study, and just tell them, look, this is rejected. If you want to redo the study, this is what you should do. Is what they're writing about relevant? One of my partners, who's a hand-elbow guy who's in this society, had a great comment on a review he did for us. The author started out and said, nobody before has looked at such and such and such and such. And Mac started his review out and said, there's a reason nobody's looked at this before. Nobody cares. And one of my favorite reviews ever. And he was right. It was just such an obscure, rare topic, that is the thing they're writing about relevant. I mean, some things are, and most things are, but, occasionally you'll get some things that are just so bizarre. What about the writing style? I get asked this a lot. Do I care about this, or do we just care about the science? I do care about this. And, it's just like in medical school. When you applied for medical school, you write a sloppy essay, there's typos and spelling errors. That counts against you. The other guy and you are equal. The other person's getting in, not you. I think it's the same on these papers. You send me a sloppy paper, and that's demerits against you. Now, we understand that we have international authors, and they're not English speakers as primary languages, but if you can't understand it, it has to be revised so that people reading in English can understand it. There are all sorts of editing services that they can get, and you can suggest that and say you should resubmit it with an editing service. We do that all the time. And when you get to the discussion, the biggest problem with discussions is they're too long. If you remember the movie A River Runs Through It, the kid was homeschooled by his minister father, and he was teaching him how to write a paper. And every time he wrote the paper, he looked at it and said, that's very good. He goes, now do it again, half again as long. And he'd go back. And by the time he finished it, it was like 1/10 the size of the original paper. That's what discussions should be. Again, you'll see the resident papers write, starting out and saying, Neer described 3 phases of impingement syndrome. I think most people reading the Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery have learned that by now. They don't need to be doing a review of the whole world's literature, unless, of course, it's a systematic review or something like that. The biggest problem in the conclusions of the paper is overstating the conclusions and coming up with, saying that their paper will not only, heal the rotator cuff, it will cure cancer, end world hunger, and probably solve global warming. You may have noticed that they announced the Nobel Prizes last week. There are very few orthopedic surgeons that win Nobel Prizes. But many of the article conclusions make it sound like their article is worthy of that. So be careful of that. So what should your review look like? Should be a general statement at the beginning, what's good, bad, and what you basically think of it, and sort of state your conclusion. And then we like to see a line-by-line list of comments, like line 17, why did you decide to include workers' comp patients in your article on pediatric supracondylar fractures? Then we want you to do the decision, again, revise, reject, and accept. Do not use the thing that says do not use. The rating, again, will rate things in the top 10, top 25, top 50. If you put something in the bottom 50, you've basically blackballed that paper and saying it's just so bad it shouldn't be accepted. Our acceptance rate is 25 to 30%. So if you're selecting revise, the paper should be in the top 25%. So again, we'll ask you to review. It's a responsibility of membership in the society if you read the bylaws. We do keep track of who's reviewing and not. Many of you are at the new candidate member status, and you can advance to associate in a few years, and we are looking at that. You know, we're not trying to be jerks about this or make this onerous. It can be fun. It should be educational. I will not try to overburden you, but this sharpens your mind to read a paper critically and really see what's good and bad in it. So, thank all of you for reviewing it. Without you, we can't do this, and without reviewers, we don't have journals, so we really appreciate it. So if you guys have questions, or Jed, if you're, as the moderator, if you have questions for me.
The only thing I would add is if you're not familiar with how to review a paper, it can be kind of difficult at first. The more experience you get, the easier it'll get for you. We set up a system for our residents for Journal Club to review papers in a very systematic way and published it in the Academy's journal, the JAAOS, about 10 years ago. And if you download that paper, if you want a copy, just email me, but it's a very systematic way to write down the information and extract it, and with that sheet of paper, then you can pop off your review really quickly, and it's very thorough. It looks at things like statistical significance versus clinical significance, looks at bias sources, and so with that system, you can really develop a nice review. We see reviews from people that are like American Bandstand, you know, this is a great paper, I can dance to it, and that's about it, and those aren't very helpful. But if you have a review that really details what's good about the paper and what's bad about the paper, that of course is really a great way to make decisions.
Are there any questions out there, guys? Well, thank you for coming. It's very early. I know. Go get some breakfast, and we'll start up again in a few minutes.